year. You mentioned the election in France, but also the elections in Brazil and Hungary are going to be litmus tests for just how much appetite people in democracies have for populists who offer easy answers to complicated problems. And, in all three of those cases, we could see the populist candidate told by the electorate that actually we've had enough of this, or we might not. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see, which way those three elections in particular go.
Yeah, and I'll just pick up on the European imprint here as well, because a change of strategy, perhaps if Macron becomes president again, a change, of course, in Berlin as well, is a more robust geopolitical EU actually a danger rather than a positive for the world, given the fact that there is a very strong argument from some that a robust EU in 2014 actually helped create the Ukrainian crisis?
Well, funnily enough, in the very same annual, so this is our annual, The World Ahead, but in last year's edition, we asked Ursula von der Leyen to write about what the role of the EU is geopolitically. And her answer was that it's got this sort of superpower of being a convener, that there are lots of people around the world who won't talk to each other, but they will respectively talk to the EU. So the EU has this ability to moderate discussions that otherwise wouldn't happen, to bring people together, to be a sort of emollient in these difficult tensions. So that's a rather different perspective from one that says that the EU is making things worse here. And I think actually, if you listen to what the Russians are saying, they're really complaining about NATO. They're not complaining about the EU.
Tom, can I take you in a slightly different direction? Today we've got 6 crypto company executives appearing in Congress. Apparently they're going to tell the politicians that if there isn't sensible regulation, then there is a risk that this business will migrate from the United States to other countries. But we've already seen, of course, China and a number of other countries crack down on the crypto business. What are you forecasting for 2022 for the whole industry?
Well, yes, it's very clear that the crypto industry in the US absolutely hates the SEC and doesn't want to be regulated by the SEC and would like a new regulator to be created, please. They hate Gary Gensler. They think that he's obviously on record as a skeptic about all of this. But I think more broadly, what we're seeing here is this three-way fight between 3 different camps about how you should be considering the future of money. You've got the sort of tech industry approach to this, very much modelled on the Chinese way of having these super apps where you can combine payments and financial services with lots and lots of other internet things. You've got the DeFi, crypto, blockchain crowd who say, no, we don't want centralization, we want decentralization, we want to get away from the tech companies and the central banks having too much power. And then, of course, you've got the central bank saying, well, if anyone's going to issue digital money around here, shouldn't it be us? And I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about central bank digital currencies, which obviously are not crypto. Next year, the Chinese, who are probably the most advanced on this, are going to be pushing that very hard around the Beijing Olympics. They've already done trials. And so really it is down to the regulators to decide what mixture of these 3 different versions, these 3 different models we end up with in different countries. And regulators in different parts of the world are going to make different calls on that. We've seen on the one hand, Brazil's central bank has created its own digital payment system. On the other hand, El Salvador has tried to adopt Bitcoin as a currency, which has not gone well at all. So I think we're going to see different models in different parts of the world, as we do with other technologies, and we're going to get different outcomes in different places too. But crypto is going to be part of that solution for many people in many parts of the world.
Yeah, and obviously the other big topic I think that most of our audience is trying to grapple with at the moment is how are central banks going to give a measured response to, one, inflation, but then the threat from Omicron. What are you forecasting in terms of policy action and potential policy mistakes?
Yeah, it is a very difficult situation that policymakers find themselves in. And we honestly don't know at this point what the net impact of Omicron will be on inflation. You can argue it both ways. It does seem likely on balance that it will make inflation higher for longer, and it will make it more difficult to recover. It will be, if it's not a return to lockdowns and all the rest of it, it is at best a bump in the road towards a more normal world. The other thing we're really worried about is the impact of Omicron on the Chinese economy. You've just mentioned Evergrande and so on, and we'll see what happens with those coupon payments. But, China's approach to suppression, COVID suppression, where you have this zero COVID approach, doesn't really work terribly well with Delta, which is why they've been keeping the borders closed and so on. It would be even less suitable with Omicron, and so we're very worried that that could cause problems in the Chinese economy, which would then ripple elsewhere. And if the supply chains are disrupted again, that could push up prices, and you could get inflation getting worse and staying higher for longer. So it really does all hinge on what we learn about Omicron in the coming days and weeks, because it's extremely, extremely uncertain, and the outlook for inflation was already extremely uncertain anyway. So this really doesn't help.
Tom, just a final quick one from me, a bit of a joke really. We've joked before about the Economist should be named the organisation never knowingly wrong, but what did you get wrong this year? That's what I want to know. In your forecast for 21, what is it you guys have to hold your hand up and say, we misunderstood that one?
No, absolutely. So I do write an article every year saying what we got right and what we got wrong. We did have a pretty good year in 2021. I think that's because we knew that the pandemic would be the biggest story in many countries and many industries. But yeah, what did we get wrong? Well, we did say there was a risk of post-election violence in America, but we didn't. We underestimated the extent to which Donald Trump would try to hold on to power. I think the main thing we got wrong was we didn't use the word variant anywhere in last year's edition. So we underestimated the risk of new variants. I think we could have we played that up a bit more. Obviously, we have had the vaccine program has been very good. We said that Afghanistan, the Taliban would end up in charge, but we thought this would be as a result of a political deal, not a military clean sweep. We said there would be a new prime minister in Japan probably, but we got the wrong person. And we also thought that oil prices would continue to stay relatively subdued. And obviously that hasn't happened. So this spike in energy prices and the spike in inflation is, in retrospect, probably the biggest change in the situation from where we expected it to be a year ago.
Tom, fascinating to hear that such intelligent minds there can also get it wrong. And I think that just highlights too for market participants where there's error as well as they put those trades on. So Tom, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Tom Standage, Deputy Editor at The Economist. Australia will join the list of countries staging a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics next year. Prime Minister Scott Morrison attributed the decision to alleged human rights abuses, as well as moves from Beijing to slow or block imports from Australia. Coming up on the show, Nestlé trims its L'Oreal stake. More on two of Europe's biggest consumer goods companies and what the deal means just ahead.
Good morning, everyone. This is Joe from New York Trading Room. As usual, we trade gold in the first hour in London. Our target 15,000 a month. So far we did 4,000 for the last few days. If you look for last 3 months, we did like 36,000. Now, what I'm waiting for, I usually wait. If the market is going higher, I short. If the market is going down, I usually buy, but I need to have the right setup. Right now, the market is not going. You cannot tell that the market is going up or down right now. That's why I'm waiting a little bit. If you look yesterday, the market was rally, I short. The market went down, I bought, and I sold. So we did like a few trade yesterday: 291, 501, 48, 408, 136, and 317. So the key is to wait for the right setup. Then you take the trade. So just be patient. We need to see if the market is going to go higher or down, up or down. Then we will take the trade. Okay. Now, Forex market also this year we did about
A study by
so after we're done with the gold trade, we do Forex, and you can see we did like 319,000. So let's focus on the gold trade, then we move to Forex trade after that.
recovered from a prior infection saw better results, suggesting a booster dose would help. Now, BioNTech is set to make an announcement on the efficacy of the vaccine against the Omicron variant before the end of the week. Airbus says it delivered 58 planes in November. The company had set a 2021 target of delivering 600 aircraft this year, meaning it will have to deliver 82 aircraft in the next few weeks. Despite a winter flare-up in COVID cases, Airbus managed to deliver 89 planes last December, although that was below pre-pandemic levels of around 125 jets. So, Steve, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a slow wind down over at Airbus into the year end.
Nestle is selling part of its stake in L'Oreal back to the cosmetics company. The deal, valued at 10 billion euros, will see the Swiss food and beverage giant reduce its holdings in the French cosmetics firm to 20.1%, down from 23.3%. I guess, Charlotte, a lot of questions now, but what they're going to be doing with the money? Will they be doing buybacks or actually acquisitions of assets? Because, of course, we know that Nestle, like a lot of these consumer products groups, have got activists knocking at the door.
Yes, and that's been on the cards for a while, is the speculation of what Nestlé was going to do with their L'Oreal stake. But look at L'Oreal, they already said they reduced their stake already in 2014 from 31% to 23%. Then after the passing of Liliane Bettencourt, there was also a lot of rumors what would happen then, because that was putting an end, her passing put an end to an agreement between the Bettencourt family and Nestlé of not upping their stake in L'Oreal. There was a lot of question then, what would Nestlé sell their stake? Would they actually go for a takeover? So there was a lot of rumors there. Remember, in 2014, the L'Oreal shares were at 200 euros. This time the deal was at 400 euros. Nestlé said, we will sell our stake potentially when it is the right moment. And so maybe some of this pressure the Nestlé is under, encouraging them to reduce their stake from 23.3% in L'Oreal to 20.1%. So that's 22.3 million shares. L'Oreal will pay 400 euros per share. So that's a 5.8% discount compared to yesterday's closing price. The total would be 8.9 billion euros, and L'Oréal said they will finance this with cash and new debt. Remember, at the time already, L'Oréal would say they were standing ready to buy Nestlé's stake if Nestlé was going to sell it and potentially sell their own stake in Sanofi. L'Oréal has a 9% stake in Sanofi, so they could potentially look at selling this to have some cash. It was a good acquisition on the horizon, something like that. It looks like at the moment they are not going to touch this, and they will finance this operation with cash and new debt. And all the shares will be cancelled at the latest in August 2022. That the IMF granted a special waiver to the Bettencourt family to not have to file an obligation to put a takeover offer as they pass the threshold of a third stake, a third of the capital and voting rights in L'Oréal. Now, the composition of the board is not changing, and the board's members remain unchanged. Now, the L'Oréal saying that the transaction will have an accretive effect on L'Oréal's earning per share of more than 4% in the full year, and the company again saying that this is reinforcing the shareholder stability around the Bettencourt Mayors family. And look, according to reports, Nestlé approached L'Oréal a couple of months ago, and since then the negotiations have been going on to finally reach this agreement that was announced last night. Karen.
Charlotte, thank you very much. I'm just going to take our viewers quickly to live shots coming out of Germany. We are setting up for the end of an era around Angela Merkel's chancellorship, and Olaf Scholz is expected to be voted in as chancellor at the Bundestag today. We've got a very big moment for the three coalition parties today. And we've already been covering this in recent days, pen to paper on agreements and the new arrangements between the government. But another big day on the official side for these new parties. So we'll be right back with more.
There's no price action so far. Right now, you cannot take long or short because the price is not moving. Now for Forex option today, we have euro dollar $1.1305 and $1.1350. 1.1305 big option, euro dollar. So this is the option, this line here and this line here. It's 345 million and 423 million.
The stock market open is here, and just quickly, you can see these live pictures still coming through from Germany as Angela Merkel, the Chancellor for 16 years in Germany, is set to hand over to Olaf Scholz today. We've seen the signing of a coalition agreement yesterday, paving the way for the new Chancellor. And you can see Angela Merkel, they're talking to Gerhard Schröder, the Chancellor who was in charge from 1998 to 2005. So this is a landmark day in German and European politics. And we'll come back to more analysis shortly. But let's just take a quick look at these markets as we open up for trade. The scene has been set for a slightly weaker session today after a stellar day played out across European markets yesterday. 2.5% bounce on the benchmark here in Europe as we closed up shop yesterday, and particularly on the German and French markets, a little bit more than that, close to the 3% range is what we witnessed. The US markets following suit and a real recovery trade overnight. So markets today, stateside is still looking firmer, but here in Europe, you can see a little bit more caution just entering the mix. Let's move on to the sectors, and you can see where some of that buying and selling is taking place at the sector level. Oil and gas at the bottom, healthcare stocks at the top. That is a much more cautious stance as you look at the sectors. Travel and leisure giving back a little bit of territory too. TUI was one of the big ones reporting this morning, and you can see in the early action, it is right at the bottom of the basket, despite forecasting a fairly good signals for next year. Basic resources are trading in the red at this stage. In fact, more redding at a sector level than what we're seeing in green so far. Autos moving lower. Retail stocks, M&S, right at the bottom of the basket of stocks. Industrials trade lower by about 0.2. Construction financials rounding out the weaker parts of this market. Now, just moving into the green, real estate at this stage, utilities. Third top performer is food and drink, up about 0.2. Nestle on the movements around L'Oreal. That's a stock that's moving to the upside today. Household goods moves into the green by a third, but it is healthcare right at the top of the markets. A quick look at the boards. This is where we're traveling today. 73.49. We're still supported on the FTSE, and this is very much a higher range for the UK stock market to be holding on to. Also supported too for the French market. So we are stepping away from some of those early red signals that we were expecting. We are just gliding high, and you can see firm above the 7,000 point mark. The next target is 7,100. This is how we finished up on the German market, and you can see the contrast and how strong it was. A little bit of red coming through from the periphery. And we've got the SMI based on that healthcare performance, the sector that's driving higher. It's supporting stocks in Zurich this morning. But you can see events continue to unfold there in Germany as we take those live pictures for you. The German stock market a little bit slow to open up this morning. I wonder whether there will be any move on domestic politics on the back of this Bundestag vote. Expected to see the new Chancellor Olaf Scholz. That is a very big moment for these European markets. And what type of sea change it will mean domestically for Germans, but I think curiously too for a lot of people, the impact that we're going to see at a European level after what has been an era of stability under Angela Merkel. Let's get out to Annette for more. Annette, you've been covering this for many, many months, and this marks the beginning of a brand new chapter.
Exactly. It's the end of a 16-year-long chapter under Angela Merkel, where she was more or less a pair of steady hands or safe hands for Germany. So what Olaf Scholz is pledging to do is progress. That's the big headline. Also yesterday when we saw the signing of the new coalition contract. So that's the landmark. He wants to make Germany more modern, more innovative, and his government is pledging to ensure that we are staying competitive. But of course, while they look at the medium-term projects, they have really short-term problems which they have to tackle first, and that's the worsening corona crisis in the country. We have the highest death toll of corona or COVID-related deaths since February yesterday, and the cases keep on rising, despite Omicron not having really overwhelmingly arrived in the country. And on top of that, of course, is the escalation in the Ukraine with Russia demonstrating force at the border of the country. And that is something they need to tackle also imminently right now, because the pressure is mounting there as well. So it will be an interesting and very, very swift start to the new job for Olaf Scholz. When you'll be sworn in by midday today, as per timeline, this is expected to happen at 12 o'clock local time. Now we are seeing the vote to start at 9 o'clock right now in Parliament, and this is due to last for roughly 90 minutes. Then he's going to go to Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who's the president of Germany, who will then officially nominate him because he has the top job of the country. And then Olaf Scholz will go back to Parliament, and then there will be the official swearing-in ceremony. And then he will not have a lot of time to actually think about what he's doing next, because his calendar is already pretty full. On Friday, he'll be in Paris to meet Macron, and they will need to start discussing what they are planning on doing with Russia and the Ukraine, and that's already high up on the agenda there. So I guess this government will have a very swift start to tackle, as I was saying, the imminent crisis, be it on the health side or on the geopolitical side.
Annette, I just want to come back to the COVID situation and the government approach as we see soaring cases and a fairly grim outlook for Christmas, because at this point on markets, we've had the reopening theme. It's meant some of the big delivery services are being left behind. We're seeing right at the bottom of boards, HelloFresh, Delivery Hero today, Zalando in the e-commerce space, a bet on a reopening theme. But what are you hearing on the ground there as you battle the fourth wave?
Well, there are rumors that there are plans to, again, close down restaurants, at least in those areas where the incidence level is very high. And I guess we're already seeing, some movement towards that. For example, Bavaria, where restaurants are only open until 8 o'clock in some region. The same holds true in Saxony. So this could well happen, because clearly also the new health minister, Lauterbach, who was already a very vocal voice during the three previous waves of corona, and he is seen as a hardliner when it comes to fighting the crisis. So I guess we are going to see more lockdown measures coming in here in Germany if cases will not go down substantially. And also, of course, looking at the death toll and the hospitalization rates, that is what people are looking right now at. And we have a couple of regions in Germany where hospitals are already overwhelmed. So I guess, yes, it could be tougher when it comes to the hospitality and retail sector going ahead.
Which does make you question the trade then we're seeing on some of those so-called pandemic winners, where investors have been playing the restrictions through the delivery sites. Thank you very much for that, Annette. I want to take you to Volkswagen, which is also fighting out towards the bottom of the boards today. We are seeing a weak print, although just trying to claw back some of that territory, as you can see while I'm talking about the stock performance. Volkswagen is reportedly exploring an IPO of its luxury car maker Porsche, according to two sources speaking with Reuters. And elsewhere, Apple produced 20% fewer iPhone 13s in the month of September and October, according to Nikkei sources. iPhone assembly stopped altogether for a few days in October, a first for the tech giant in over a decade, amid a global chip shortage and power restrictions in China. A quick look across the supply chain, and you can see it's a week-old session playing out. Meantime, Barclays has raised its rating on SocGen to overweight from equal weight. Meanwhile, Morgan Stanley went the other direction, trimming its SocGen rating to underweight from equal weight. And you see the stock is trading high today, so rating is somewhat instrumental. And Airbus. We were talking about this earlier, and its plans into year-end as the stock moves into the green. The company says it delivered 58 planes in November. The company had set a 2021 target of delivering 600 aircraft this year, meaning it will have to deliver 82 aircraft in the final few weeks. And another big story on the corporate scene today, Nestlé is selling part of its stake in L'Oreal back to the cosmetics company. We've been closely watching this for years, and you can see a pop in L'Oreal stock. The deal, valued just shy of 9 billion euros, will see the Swiss food and beverage giant reduce its holdings in the French cosmetics firm to 20.1%, down from 23.3%. There's not been a bad bet, though, I've got to say, as you've seen the escalation in luxury cosmetics in particular over at L'Oreal. Jeff, let me toss it over to you. Some very big themes are playing out in this market as we look at the geopolitics, the domestic situation in Germany, but of course this reopening theme that investors are keen to jump on board again with the variant fear starting to subside.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if the director can pop up those Bundestag pictures, if we still have them live here, I don't think we should in any way underplay here just how significant and dramatic this development is now for Germany as we see Olaf Scholz effectively coming into power. This is, I think, the first ever time we've seen this combination of parties running the country at a federal level. And to a certain extent, even as we have this 177-page manifesto now with some fairly detailed commitments about energy, about minimum wages, about the way that business is going to expect to be treated going forward. 177 pages doesn't actually give you a manifesto for dealing with some of the near-term challenges that we've been discussing this morning. And that's where I think the nuances are going to be interesting here, because we have a Green Party that didn't want Nord Stream 2 in the first place. We have a government that's now going to have to react to the ongoing saber rattling we see from the Putin administration. We haven't even talked this morning about the ongoing sores of anti-democratic behavior in Hungary and Poland. And then, of course, there are differences of opinion about how Germans' fiscal situation should shift from here, although the manifesto itself does appear to greenlight an increase in spending for infrastructure. But we shouldn't just understate how meaningful this shift is going to be. I'm grateful to The Guardian, who actually broke down the numbers and said, during Merkel's time, her 16 years, we've effectively had 4 French presidents, 5 British prime ministers, and 8 Italian premiers in that time. And so what we're witnessing is a very significant shift in leadership at the head of the German administration. My interest in many ways is not only about how the new government addresses some of these near-term challenges around COVID, around Russia, around relations with China. I know Olaf Scholz has been very reluctant to be seen to be too negative towards China, and recently skirted questions about whether Germany would join the diplomatic boycott that the US has now initiated here. But I'm also very interested to see whether this is a very pro-EU government going forward. It would seem so, given Olaf Scholz has been heavily involved in the COVID pandemic relief fund operation that was launched 18 months or so ago. But what happens next in terms of relations with the French is going to be key, Steve, it seems.
Yeah, all of the above, Jeff. And I think it's impossible to argue with anything that you or Karen have said this morning. But look, you mentioned that thing that The Guardian said. A point I've made a few times on air over the years is the Germans don't like changing their leaders very often. In our lifetime, and you and I get back to a vintage which is late 60s, early 70s, and I'll say early 70s on this occasion, we've only had 4 chancellors. We've had Helmut Schmidt, Gerhard Schröder, Helmut Kohl, and of course, not in that order, but also with Frau Merkel as well. So the fact of the matter is we've only had 4 chancellors since the early 70s. So we've had steady hand at the tiller. The Germans don't like the change of leadership very often. And I've got to say, and I know that it's almost sacrilege to say so, because people say, and Netta said it earlier on, what a steady hand at the tiller Frau Merkel has been. I think there has been a lack of leadership from Germany on a lot of issues, which a lot of Europeans are looking for a change now. And I mean, for instance, on defense as well, when I've been listening to and talking to the likes of Bruno Le Maire, the likes of Macron as well, we're talking about a robust foreign policy is being called for. Now, whether that's EU or a beefed up NATO, that remains to be seen. And Germany has been a laggard on that front. The German defense minister formally defending the fact that Germany is not spending its 2% on GDP. That lady happens to be in charge of the EU now as well, Ursula von der Leyen as well. So whether it's on money, both domestically spending and amount of German money that's going to go out elsewhere into the EU, whether it's on foreign policy, whether it's on energy, which you've alluded to as well with the transition, or whether it's the digitization of the German economy, which has been woefully lacking in many ways as well. I think, I'm afraid, Frau Merkel has left enormous amounts of issues on the table that perhaps her administration could have addressed earlier and hasn't done full-heartedly. I know that many people think that's an unpopular view, but it's worth putting out there. Karen.
Yeah, Steve, I mean, our first hour guest almost laughed at us at the implications of a European army and whether it could have any impact practically against Russia if there was a situation around Ukraine, you say, let alone defend itself from any onslaught. So that was quite concerning, I've got to say. But I just want to push on to the corporate scene. We'll continue to follow these pictures in Germany on what has been a monumental day, but plenty of corporate stories too. I want to come back to the big one around L'Oreal and Nestle reducing its stake in the cosmetics giant. Charlotte, if you take a look at the share price performance this year, another outperformance from L'Oreal, gained 36% versus 16% from Nestle. This has been a company that's contributed supersized growth to Nestle. Talk us through the sale and implications for earnings for Nestle down the track.
Well, according to Nestle, they say that this transaction with L'Oréal will have an accretive effect on L'Oréal's earning per share of more than 4% in the full year. L'Oréal have said for a while that they were standing by, ready to buy that stake from Nestle if and when Nestle was willing to sell it. So now announcing yesterday, Nestle, they were selling their stake from 23.3% to 20.1%. So that's 22.3 million shares. L'Oréal will pay €400 per share, so it's a 5.8% discount compared to yesterday's closing price. That's a total amount of 8.9 billion. L'Oréal said they will finance this operation with cash and new debt. At the time when they said they were standing by, ready to buy potentially Nestle stake, they said they were also ready to potentially sell their Sanofi stake. L'Oréal has a 9% Sanofi stake and would potentially sell this to have some cash to pay for any sort of operation, potential acquisition. It looks like it's not the case at this time. They will not use this and instead finance with cash and new debt. And then they said that the shares will be cancelled at the latest in August 2022. So that will bring the Bettencourt-Meyers family stake to 34.7% from 33.3%. And the IMF has granted them a special waiver to the Bettencourt family to not have the obligation to file a mandatory public offer as their threshold passes the 1/3 of capital and voting rights in L'Oréal. Now, the composition of the board remains unchanged. Nestlé say they remain fully supportive of the company's value and the company's value creation strategy. And again, L'Oréal saying this is a way to reinforce the shareholder stability around the Bettencourt-Meyers family. Remember, Nestlé already reduced their stake in 2014 from 30% to 23%. They said they were again waiting for the right moment to potentially reduce it further. And with the passing of Liliane Bettencourt in 2017, it triggered all sorts of rumors on whether then what was the next move for Nestlé potentially. And now they announced then this move yesterday. According to reports, the negotiations have been going on for the past 2 months. Nestlé approached L'Oréal for this operation. Now that we see that the L'Oréal shares are higher, about 1% on the CAC, and the Nestlé shares are up 1.2%, guys.
Thank you very much for that, Charlotte. And we are going to leave you with some of the live pictures we've been taking as Germany gets set up for a new government today. Heir apparent is how Olaf Scholz positioned himself, and he is set to become heir to Angela Merkel today as we wait for an official vote in the Bundestag.
Okay, so we have a lot of option today on dollar yen. Like I put all the line for the option today. Let me see if I can post. This is, you can see in dollar yen, we have a lot of option today. And tomorrow also, we have a lot of option on dollar yen. So I put all the line here for you so you can trade between the line. Also, we have open trade. OCCAD, we are up 41 bips so far right now for OCCAD. The second trade we have pound dollar, we are up 36 pip. The third trade, dollar yen, we are up 32 pips. So this is the 3 trade open so far. And let me see if I can take a new one now. Like OC New Zealand, we can go long. I'm looking to go long 104.95. Stop loss 20 pips and the target 40 pips. Because you can see we have a green. We have a green, but I don't want to go long right here. I usually wait for a pullback. Okay. So just keep on the radar. Like you see, we have here. So if you are trading above this black line, you buy the dip. Always buy the pullback. You will make money.
Let's take you to some more live pictures coming through this morning. Christine Lagarde is speaking, and she is giving a taped address to the Systemic Risk Board conference. So effectively talking about the macroprudential risk to the European system. Don't forget there's already been some concerns about the impact of escalation in prices on the German property sector at this point and debts in the system. So let's just take a little listen in and see where Christine Lagarde is taking this conversation.
Have a role to play too in identifying and mitigating the financial aspects of climate-related risks. We should not fall into the fails logic of trade-offs, believing that policies which make the financial system more resilient will hold it back from funding the transformation of our economies. Stronger banks are banks that lend more. Let me now move to the second threat. Cyber incidents. The financial sector relies on robust information and communication technology. People's confidence in the sector, in turn, depends on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data and systems it uses. Cyber incidents, however, can corrupt information and destroy confidence. As a result, they pose a systemic risk. To date, we are lucky that we have not seen a systemic cyber incident affecting the financial system at large. But the cyber attacks on hospitals in Europe during the COVID-19 crisis, or the attack on the Colonial Pipeline in the United States, have given us a taste of what could happen in the future. Such an attack is probably now...
All right, well, let's pick it up from Christine Lagarde, and let's talk about some of the other stories that we've been focused on all morning, specifically around the Hong Kong session. And shares of Weibo are trading lower. This is the first day on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. The Chinese social media giant priced its secondary listing at 272 Hong Kong dollars and 80 cents a share, raising over $380 million. The debut comes amid wider pressure on China's technology sector. And of course, the company is facing regulatory scrutiny in Beijing and in Washington, as are most in the tech sector in China at the moment. Evergrande shares hit an all-time low after the company missed its debt payment deadline, potentially marking its first offshore default on public bonds. The property developer continues to face over $300 billion in unpaid debt. Other Chinese real estate developers are also showing signs of the strain, trading in much smaller peer. Kaiser was suspended today after it reportedly failed to meet its own $400 million debt obligations. Emily Tan has more on the story.
Evergrande shares sink to a record low after missing a debt payment deadline this week and now at risk of becoming China's biggest defaulter. Failure to make $82.5 million in interest payments would trigger a cross default on $19 billion of international bonds. Evergrande shares are at their lowest since their November 2009 debut, down 1.6%. The Guangdong provincial government has since stepped in to help manage the fallout, a signal that the developer's failure would be managed. Meantime, Kaiser, its shares were suspended from trade today pending an announcement containing inside information. It too missed a $400 million offshore debt deadline. Reports are that Kaiser is unlikely to make the necessary payments. Non-payment would put the developer into technical default and also trigger a cross default on offshore bonds totaling $12 billion. For now, the fallout at these mainland developers have been broadly contained, together with policymakers in Beijing becoming more vocal. We continue to follow the developments. In Hong Kong, I'm Emily Tan.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Emily. I wanted to take a slightly different tack on this story because I know we talked about it at length about an hour or so ago. So I just want to, as we circle back to look at the Chinese property market and ask ourselves, whether this is a liquidity story, whether it's a solvency story, whether it's an individual story linked to one or two mainland companies that the government can carefully put to sleep, or whether it's systemic across the Chinese property sector? I think these are all terribly important questions. And I'll tell you why I think they're very important beyond the mere fact that this could be about one or two businesses that disappear in China, is because in China, real estate is for most investors one of the few ways that they can actually build wealth. And there was a very interesting McKinsey report, I think it was out a few weeks ago, that was talking about the rise of the global balance sheet, but it was focused on the ownership of assets and who owns them and how they own them. And what was clearly apparent was that outside of real estate, there are very few other assets owned by Chinese consumers that have shown appreciable growth in value. And we are at a state, as McKinsey points out, where asset values now across the board are 50% higher than the long run average as they relate to income. And that tells you that we are at a point, I think, globally, where investors have to be very careful about the decisions they take next with their money, whether they take profit or whether they move into a new asset class or whether they sit pat at this time. And I think why this whole story about how the government unravels the property crisis at Evergrande matters is because it will help shape how Chinese consumers need to think about how much protection the government will give them on those real estate assets, given that probably at least 2/3 of their wealth is tied up in property ownership rather than, as we see in the United States, perhaps ownership of fixed income instruments and equities somewhat offsets the reliance on continual depreciation in property assets. I don't know if either of you guys want to pick up on that.
I will pick up, Jeff. I think we've gone a little over, but yeah, absolutely. All of the above, fantastic points as well. I think we're basically just pointing to the fact this isn't just a property company. This is about the social infrastructure in the country as well, and what is at stake from not just Evergrande, but the broader sector. But we need to move on. We'll come back to the story, of course, throughout the show and other shows as well. Coming up on this show as well, though, a tense call between the US and Russian leaders raises the prospect of sanctions and more Nord Stream 2 pipeline delays. We'll discuss this. Plus, Karen.
And it's still a big day in Germany. We are keeping you up to speed with live pictures as a new government is set to take over today. Talk will be back in 2.
Now we have Eurobound and the OCCAD. You can see we have a buy signal on OCCAD, but the problem is the road is very busy, so the price is gonna go sideways. Why? Because you can see the price is not moving anywhere, because if you try to go higher, you have this number, this number, this number, this number, this number. So you can see the price going up and down. If you try to go down, you see a lot of numbers. This is like a car and you have a lot of traffic and the price doesn't move up and down. So in order for us to go long or short, we need a clear road. Let's check. You see the same thing here. Even if we have a buy signal, but the road is very busy, I don't want to stay on a trade. We're not moving. You see, it's because the price have hard time. You see, every time it go higher, he have so many number above it and under. So you have so many numbers, so the price is not moving. What I need something like a very clear road. Dollar CAD. You see, this trade is little better because you can see the only two number is gonna stop the price to going down, just 26.36. If we clear this, we're going to 26.25. So the dollar CAD, a sell, it's a best one right now because you have about 8 pips, then 20 pips. So you have a clear road about 20 pips, 10 pips and 30 pips. So this is the best trade so far. So we'll keep your eye on dollar CAD.
Welcome to Scorebox. These are your headlines. European equity markets, a bit of a mixed open. The DAX under pressure as Olaf Scholz prepares to be sworn in as Germany's new chancellor, ending 16 years of leadership under Angela Merkel. Nestlé cutting its stake in L'Oréal to 20% with a near €9 billion share sale back to the French cosmetics brand at €400 per share. TUI shares sinking towards the bottom of the stock 600 after posting a €2 billion loss on the year, despite the travel group forecasting a strong rebound next year. And Presidents Biden plus Putin square off in a 2-hour phone call, with the American leader threatening sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine, as the White House vows to take a tough line.
As President Biden looked President Putin in the eye and told him today that things we did not do in 2014, we are prepared to do now.
European stock markets have been open for half an hour so far, and we are seeing a bit of trade unfold. It did look as though these markets might be somewhat lifeless after some stellar gains yesterday, but perhaps the Wall Street trade encouraging these markets, suggesting there should be more green. And in fact, if you look at the FTSE, we've bounced close to 0.5% on the back of 1.5% pop yesterday. The other markets, the French market, almost 3% gain in trade yesterday. It's added another 4/10 plus. So it's a semi-strong session for some of these markets, but not so for the German stock market. We've been closely eyeing developments out of the Bundestag this morning as we wait for the Chancellor and waiting, Olaf Scholz, to be confirmed as the new Chancellor, down to a vote in the House. The early stage for that market is weaker, so just a little bit of caution there. But we are seeing a little bit of selling in some of the big auto names, chemicals companies, delivery platforms. That's just impacting the German stock market at this point. But in contrast, we are seeing green elsewhere. Let's just peel away from the heat map, and I can show you the sectors. Most sectors were trading weaker at the start, and you can see that's flipped to most now trading positive. The patches of red still around that autos basket does account for the selling that we're seeing in Volkswagen, BMW, Daimler this morning on the German market. Oil and gas is a weaker trade, along with resources and banking stocks. But from there, we start to pop green. And you can see how strong some of the percentage gains are now as we move throughout the session. More than 1% on healthcare. That's been a very strong performer from the outset. We are waiting for more information around vaccine efficacy. Later on, this is a big one potentially for markets, as we've seen the recovery trade play out across the board in various global equities. Financial services, strong industrials, 9/10, and utilities also getting a nice move into positive territory. These stocks, gainers and losers. You can see big movers, Berkeley, that is up 5.8%. That's strong move. Man Group bouncing 4%. Ubisoft Entertainment also in positive territory. Weaker ones, and you can see some big German names from Infineon to Umicore, HelloFresh, the delivery platform, down 5.6%. And also worth noting, TUI Arger, despite giving us just some optimism around what you're seeing for next year. It is a weaker trade today, and it is looking to make a return trip to profit. That's been the big headline story in 2022 after posting a €2 billion loss on the year. The travel group has said first quarter bookings are already at 70% of pre-COVID levels. Let's hope we have some more freedom to travel in 2022. Jeff, this year has been a little bit stop-start, disappointing if you made plans, but perhaps costly, and also requiring some quarantine on return.
Yeah, no, very uncertain at this stage, and interesting that TUI feels they can give us so much guidance right now through to the spring of 2022. Shifting gears, let's talk about this conversation between the US president and the Russian president. Biden apparently threatening the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, with economic sanctions if Moscow launches an attack on Ukraine. In a phone call between the two leaders, Biden also said he is continuing to work with NATO countries to bolster Ukrainian territorial sovereignty, while Putin requested guarantees that NATO is not planning further eastbound expansion. The call comes amid an apparent Russian military buildup around the Ukrainian border, which has been stoking fears of a possible incursion. The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stressed the US would take more decisive action than it had during Russia's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, adding that the onus is now on the Russian leader to react.
We still do not believe that President Putin has made a decision. What President Biden did today was lay out very clearly the consequences if he chooses to move. He also laid out an alternative path that is fundamentally in keeping with the basic principles and propositions that have guided America in the Euro-Atlantic area for the past 70 years. And ultimately, we will see in the days ahead through actions, not through words, what course of action Russia chooses to take.
The Biden administration has also said it would prioritize working with Germany to halt the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if Russia decides to invade Ukraine. The pipeline, which is built but not yet activated, is already facing legal delays from Germany. Well, let's bring Annetta back into the conversation here. She joins us now as the Bundestag is going through the formal process of voting in Olaf Scholz as Chancellor. And Annetta, this is quite a heavy, if you like, set of policy obligations now already facing this new German government as it has to think about legislation around the unvaccinated and Omicron. And of course, it's dealing with this very present risk of the Russian buildup on the Ukrainian border. What are we hearing early doors about plans to address that?
Well, actually, they will address it very swiftly. I think Olaf Scholz is bound to travel to Paris on Friday, where he will talk about the situation in the Ukraine with Macron. They will find a common stance, a common approach, because clearly those two countries, France and Germany, always have to work together when it comes to those existential questions. And this is an existential question, what happens in the Ukraine and how to actually treat or what to do with Putin in that respect. And of course, Nord Stream 2 could be an important factor in that equation. I mean, the US is pressuring Germany not to open it at any, or actually to stop it altogether if Putin would enter the Ukraine. And that is actually according to an agreement signed by the Merkel administration back in July with Biden, when they were saying in that agreement that the deal will be off the table, the Nord Stream 2 deal, in case Russia would enter the Ukraine or threaten the Ukraine in its existence. And obviously, if Putin decides to enter the Ukraine with his troops, then this case would, that would be effective. So it remains to be seen what Putin will do. And of course, we just can only fully guess right now. But you're very right to say that Olaf Scholz, once he's sworn in by roughly lunchtime today, he has an awful lot on his plate, and they will very swiftly move on when it comes to legislation against the unvaccinated, and most likely also some more measures in terms of lockdown, because the cases are still rising here in Germany. And especially more worrisome is also the death toll, which is at the highest since February this year. So the crisis is far from over. And at the same time, the geopolitical crisis is, of course, a major concern. And at that level, it's no longer Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister, who will take care of it, but Olaf Scholz. Steve?
Yeah, brilliant summary. Thank you, Annette. Let's get to Jamie Shea, who is the former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Jamie, really good to get your expertise on this one as well. And any new government in Germany will feel the weight of history, the weight of geography, the weight of realpolitik as well. What can Germany do that they haven't done previously? Because, quite frankly, they are in a very difficult position in terms of their energy infrastructure, their economic.
So CAD is very strong, so we maybe take any trade. You can see the CAD index is very strong. The problem is the dollar also is strong. So usually we take a weak currency with a stronger currency. So just be patient, and I will let you know in the chat room which trade we're planning to take. So far we have, like I said, we have 3 trades right now. Dollar yen, we are up 32 pips. The pound dollar 36 pips. And the Aussie CAD is 41 pips. So if I have a new trade, I will post it on the chat room. That's it for today, and I will keep you updated if I have anything or any new trade. Take care, guys. Have a good day.
Of the government accord, and whereas Chancellor Merkel didn't really sort of give much to President Macron when it came to calls for more sort of European strategic autonomy, more European geopolitical capability, more European heft in the world. This time round, providing of course that Macron wins his own election next year, this time round I think we're likely to see a much sort of stronger Franco-German axis leading the European Union in a more strategic direction.